Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to look into the topic of aerial roots, and I'm going to show you one method that I have tried before, how to grow your own aerial roots on your tree. So before we start with actually getting into this method, I want to quickly talk about simply what are aerial roots, what are varieties where you find them, and why you might want them on your bonsai. So aerial roots are, as the name already says, roots that are above ground. For them to develop, you actually need quite a humid environment. So often something when you look at indoor bonsais that can be difficult to achieve if you don't have a growing tent, for example. What we're gonna do and later on look is how you can create basically your mini environment that is quite humid, which then encourages aerial roots. But as I said, you need high humidity, and then your tree, if it is a tree that can develop aerial roots, will start to grow them. So they normally come from branches, they can come from the main trunk, and they naturally will try to find their way into the soil. Once they connect with the soil, they will harden, they will grow bark, they will grow woody, and they will also just get thicker and thicker. And that of course gives your tree a very specific look then that it can be quite desirable for bonsai. So which trees normally can grow aerial roots? As I said, it is normally needed to have high humidity. So also the trees that grow them are normally trees that you can find in an environment that has high humidity. So mainly tropical trees, some subtropical trees. When we look at bonsai and indoor bonsai more specifically, this normally always includes ficus varieties. So those are the ones you see most commonly with aerial roots. I, for example, here have a ficus benjamina that has a little aerial root on it. And we will also then test our method on this tree. I have tried it before on this tree, and this is actually where this little aerial root back in the day then started to show up. So ficus definitely is one variety where you can find them. But other tropical / subtropical varieties, like for example Schefflera, are also trees where you can find aerial roots and that are quite eager in developing aerial roots if they are kept under the right conditions. So again, let's talk about the conditions. As I said, high humidity really is the key. Apart from that, of course, you also want a tree that is in general healthy, has nice, good looking foliage, doesn't have any pests on it, so it really can focus its energy on developing these new roots. What normally also helps a little bit is if the tree is pot bound, or at least slightly pot bound. So if you have a tree that has enough room to grow roots under the soil, it often doesn't really have the need to grow aerial roots to find new nutrient-rich soil. So if the tree is slightly pot bound, your chances are probably a bit higher that it will actually start to develop aerial roots once you keep it in conditions where you can grow it. For example, for me, in my normal conditions, so in my normal flat basically where I keep my trees, it normally is the case that the humidity is not high enough for them to just naturally develop aerial roots. Some of them, when I keep them on the balcony and it is a very humid summer, then they will start to develop aerial roots. However, often the season is not long enough for them to really reach the ground. When you see that they start developing the aerial roots, what you can normally do is simply guide them into the soil basically. Back in the day when we had still plastic straws, often people would take plastic straws, cut it open, or have the plastic straw cut in the right area, in the right size, and then guide the root inside the straw into the soil so it stays also again there protected from drying out, for example. Because the chance of it drying out on the way down to the soil is still quite high if the humidity would go lower again. But I would say enough about the theory. Let's now talk actually about the method that I want to present to you today. And I basically call it the plastic bag method because that is simply what it is. So we will create a little mini environment on the tree by basically putting it in a plastic bag, making sure we spray the tree first and keep it in there. I would say I will simply show you this method and talk a bit about what you really have to keep in mind when doing that. So let's start right away with that. So as I said, there are some things you have to keep in mind when you want to try out this method, and the most important one is aeration. So once you put it in the plastic bag, you don't want to keep it in there for too long at a time because of course we create high humidity in this environment then, and if we don't have any airflow coming into this environment, then you will have problems probably with mold developing on the tree, simply the tree suffering and actually not getting the air that it actually needs also to be still healthy. So how are we going to do this actually? We look at the tree right now, we check beforehand Is the foliage healthy? Is the tree in general looking like it is in a healthy state? For example, right now it shows a lot of new growth, so definitely it seems to have a lot of energy, and we want to direct some of this energy in it, creating some aerial roots. And for that, we simply need a higher moisture and high humidity in the air around the tree. So how are we going to achieve that? I have tried this method before on this tree. It worked exceptionally well. It's not only this one aerial root that has developed back then, it was actually at least 10, I would say. However, of course, you cannot really decide in which area they will pop up. I had some developing all the way up at the canopy. I had some created very low on the tree, and some just in the right area where I wanted them, on some side branches, also here on the main trunk, then going down. And that, of course, is what we're hoping for again this time. So the first thing we're actually going to do is spray the tree. So just give it already this moisture on the tree that of course will evaporate them and create the humidity that we want inside our little sphere that we're creating with the plastic bag. And then we just take the plastic bag, open it, what I tend to do is make like small ripping holes into it. So again, just get something sharp. So I, for example, simply use a chopstick and push it through and create some holes in it, that even when the plastic bag is over the tree, there will still be some airflow happening, but nevertheless not too much so it wouldn't create high humidity any longer. So I would say just like, well, a handful of those holes should be enough for it to still work. So once we have our plastic bag ready, we just need to make sure we put it over the tree in a way that doesn't damage the foliage. So make sure it is open and then just carefully place it over the tree. And normally what I then do, I have this little tray underneath anyway, so I just make sure I tuck in all the ends in this tray, and we have it like this. I might like to also make sure that the foliage is not sticking too much to the plastic, so it doesn't on the contact get like areas where it would stay too moist for too long. But as I said, important things still we should keep in mind after having it put into the bag, that we should still discuss it a little bit. So it is important to understand that this method doesn't stop with you putting your tree into the plastic bag and just leave it like this. This will definitely lead to your tree getting moldy basically underneath this, because it simply will not get enough fresh air to grow healthy still, and the air will be stale in there, and of course with the high humidity you will have also the water going off basically. So definitely not what you should do. What you should actually do is once a day take off the bag and simply air it out for 5 minutes. Really let the tree have new airflow get to it, basically exchange the entire air that was in this little sphere that you kept your tree in. Afterwards, you again go, mist it a little bit and put the plastic bag on top of it again. I normally reuse the plastic bag because of course I want to avoid additional trash with this method. It is normally not a problem. As I said, the last time I used this method, I kept using the same bag for 2 weeks until all the aerial roots that I wanted to still have started to basically reach the soil, and I had no problem with it. Of course, if you see your plastic bag starting to show any signs of discoloration or you notice a weird smell on it, then I would discard it. Otherwise, normally if you take it off every day, this should not be a problem. Because that also, of course, means that at that time the plastic bag would itself dry again and then can be reused as often as you need. And you avoid unnecessary plastic trash, which of course is the goal with this method. So if I remember correctly, after 1 week roughly, the last time I used this method, I started to see the first signs of aerial roots. And then they grew quite fast. So the first ones started to reach the soil. They were a bit lower on the tree, but they started to reach the soil at roughly, I would say, the 2 week marks, and after 1 month, if you have higher up aerial roots, they should also normally start to reach down already. As I said, once they reach the ground and they really start to develop then the little feeder roots inside the soil, normally you're good to go with taking off the plastic bag permanently again, and then your tree should actually grow quite nicely and healthily looking aerial roots. Important also maybe when it comes to the season when you should do that, I would definitely not recommend doing this in the middle of summer. It will definitely get too hot for the tree underneath here. Try to avoid too much direct sunlight. I'm doing this right now at the basically middle end of September, so the sun already lost a lot of its force here. It's no longer too hot in general in here that it would be basically cooking the tree underneath this plastic bag. That is something you should keep in mind. On the other hand, winter you might have the problem that you don't get enough warmth inside this little sphere. So if the temperature is not high enough, of course, also you won't have enough humidity within the sphere for it to really work and the tree starting to grow aerial roots. So I would say middle, late spring and the beginning of autumn are probably the best periods to try to use this method, simply because you won't risk having heat damage on the tree or it being too cold for it to not work. Of course, there's other methods that you can use to grow aerial roots. I know one very common one is to use sphagnum moss, wrap it around the trunk, and keeping the moss in just very in a moist state. And that again will encourage aerial roots growing from there. That also is a method I haven't tried yet myself, but I will definitely also try to do that next growth season. But as I had very good experiences with this method already in a prior test, I would say I will give it another try on the exact same tree. So for Ficus benjamina, it definitely worked for me. Hopefully it will work for you. If you will try this method, simply leave in the comments how it worked for you. I really am interested to see the experience other people had with this method, so definitely keep me informed on that. And hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, goodbye.